developing person-centred approaches in schools. Just like to do a little bit of housekeeping with you. During the webinar, you'll be able to type any questions or comments that you have into the questions box, and we'll be reading these out at the end of the webinar and answering your questions in that way.
Hi, I'm Jill Goodwin. I work for Preparing for Adulthood and Helen Sanderson Associates, where I lead the work on personalising education. I've spent about 5 years now supporting schools to personalise education for pupils through using a whole range of person-centred thinking tools, and also spent some time as the North West Regional Coordinator for Getting a Life.
Hello, I'm Vicky Jones. I work for Preparing for Adulthood around wider support. I also work for Helen Sanderson Associates, and I've been supporting schools and colleges in using person-centred approaches for the last 10 years, particularly around transition.
Today what we'd like to do with you is share how person-centred approaches and one-page profiles and person-centred reviews can be used in schools to inform transition and support plans. We'd also like to discuss what schools can do by themselves and with partners to support young people into adulthood with paid employment, independent living, good health and community inclusion. And we also want to look at schools' responsibilities around information and support and how they can input into the single assessment process and into the single plan. Just to tell you a little bit about Preparing for Adulthood. Following the publication of the Senko Green Paper, these 3 organisations formed a partnership to look at moving the proposals forward, particularly for young people in transition. They're the National Development Team for Inclusion, who are supporting the Pathfinders, the Council for Disabled Children, whose role is around information sharing amongst other things, and Helen Sanderson Associates, who offer wider support around non-pathfinders, and that's why we're holding this series of webinars. The programme is going to build on the learning from past initiatives, and as you can see, that's the Transitional Support Programme, Getting a Life, Value in Employment Now, Aspirations for Life, Living and Learning for Work, and Project Search. And there's so much learning there for us to build on, to support peer-to-peer learning at a local level to improve outcomes for young people, and to share knowledge of what works, the challenges and solutions with government, local agencies, families and young people. The 3 strands of work with them in terms of preparing for adulthood, as I just said, there's the Pathfinder support, there's wider support for all local areas, and there's best practice and information sharing. And these outcomes that we're focusing on are paid work for young people, for independent living, choice and control over life and support and housing, good health, friends, relationships and community inclusion. And each Pathfinder has a page on the website with updates of their activity in all these areas. In terms of wider support, this event today is part of a series of cluster events, and there's a bi-monthly e-bulletin. So please sign up for that, you'll get regular updates and just be kept up to date. Okay, so we just wanted to share with you also just the key highlights of the draft legislation. So there's an option of a personal budget for families and young people with a plan, and that's to extend choice and control over their support. There are new statutory protections for young people aged 16 to 25 in FE, and a stronger focus on preparing for adulthood. And academies, free schools, further education and sixth form colleges will have the same SEN duties as maintained schools. As it says in the paper, over the last 3 decades, education, health and social care services have changed dramatically. Parents rightly want much more convenient, personalised services over which they have greater control, and professionals' understanding of best practice has moved on. These sites have used person-centred planning to bring together support from across children's and adults' social care, education, health and employment support to enable young people with severe learning disabilities leaving education to achieve paid employment and fulfilling lives. We will use the learning from these approaches to raise aspirations and set an expectation for the way in which services should support this group of young people to make a successful transition to adulthood. By 2014, children and young people who will currently have a statement of SEN or learning difficulty assessment will have a single assessment process and education, health and care plan for their support from birth to 25. The new plan will afford the same statutory protection as the statement As I said earlier, this work builds upon the learning from a number of different programmes, and I just wanted to share a little bit more with you about the Getting a Life programme, which has informed the Preparing for Adulthood life outcomes. And you'll see on the slide there are 4 of those, and that's around employment, housing, good health, developing friendships, relationships and community. This is all based on really good planning, and part of the role for schools in this is personalising the curriculum based on this to gather information around these areas to help young people to plan and prepare for adulthood. Just wanted to show a little bit more detail about one of those pathways, and all of this information is on the website, and this is in relation to supporting young people into paid work. As you'll see, this has got a very person-centred approach embedded within it in order to inform future career planning, and that's right the way through from year 9, hopefully to really support young people to think about their career plan. So how do schools develop a person-centred or personalised approach? One way of doing that is by looking at how schools might develop one-page profiles. This is a great place to start. It really captures the important information needed to inform the single plan. The graphic we're showing you here shows how one school has implemented one-page profiles in the life of the school. It shows that in the autumn term, the teacher receives a one-page profile for each of her pupils. This means that he or she gets great information about the child, things other people appreciate, like and admire about them, the things that are really important to them, and importantly, information about the best way to support the child in the classroom. It can also include what each young person's hopes and aspirations are for the year, helping the young person and the staff to set targets which will help them to achieve these things. In October, the school will hold its annual review using the person-centred review process. We're going to talk a lot more about that in a minute. And this will enable them to update the information on the one-page profile. If the young person isn't having an annual review, then the October Parents' Evening, that would just be a great way to get parent or carers input into the one-page profile and update it that way. It's very much about making this something that's alive and goes throughout the year with the pupil, not just something that we do once and don't look at again. In the spring term, the school is using the curriculum, in particular PHSE, to explore and gather information about It's Good to Be Me. This information can also update the one-page profile. Again, if there's an annual review or parents' evenings, these can be used to update too. In the summer term, the information is used to help young people to prepare to moving to a new class or even to a new school. The one-page profile should have 3 parts to it. We just want to show you some examples so you get a bit of an idea what they could look like. The headings are always the same, but how the profiles look will be very different depending on the child, perhaps on their age, on how the child would like that to look. The first part describes the young person in a positive way, describing what others appreciate about them and what they like and admire about them, things that will make them smile. The second part records things that are important to the young person, the things that really matter to them and need to be present in their life to help them to feel happy and content. In the school context, the things that need to happen or be in place, such as saying good morning to a member of staff as they come into school, or that no one speaks to the young person as they come into school. They're as individual as the young person themselves. And the final section describes how best to support the young person. This is the detail about the support that teachers, support staff and others can provide to make sure that the young person's healthy, safe and is achieving the things that are also important to them. Just to summarise in terms of one-page profiles, one-page profile can be used to gather information about a pupil in a particular setting so that everyone knows what makes sense to and for them. So just to link back to the Getting a Life pathway, perhaps around work experience, that would be a good way to use a profile, what's important to the young person and how best to support them in that way. They're really helpful at times of transition to enable new teaching staff and or the school support team or supply teachers to know the pupil quickly. It's really important that we use the profiles to ensure that any decisions are made in the context of what matters to the pupil, as well as what is important for them to be healthy, safe, valued and having opportunities to learn. Really grounds this in a very person-centred approach. And then that also enables the school to identify any adjustments that could help the pupil to have a better day. These are often small things, small adjustments that can have a really big impact on the pupil and others. Just to sum up, as well as the benefits of the profile as a thing in itself, from a one-page profile, you can also learn what's working and not working to create actions for positive change. And one way to do this is by holding a person-centred review. I'll pass you over to Vicky, who's going to explain that in much more detail. Just before we go on to reviews, I just wanted to show you the Personalising Education website, which we would like to invite you to have a look at. That demonstrates a lot of the work we've been doing around personalising education. There's lots of examples on there in terms of profiles that children have shared with us and lots of other person-centred thinking tools and skills that we can use.
Thanks, Jill. I'd just like to talk a little bit to you about person-centred reviews. So person-centred reviews have been held as annual reviews in many schools over the past 10 years or so. And as you can see from the headings of the review, they really complement and build on the one-page profile. And as many Pathfinders are using this approach to develop their single plan, they're a really great way to review the single plan too. Person-centred reviews put the young person at the centre of the review, of their support, and basing actions on what's important to them and how they want to be supported now and in the future, and on what's working and not working for them and for other people as well. This process can meet all statutory requirements, but the spirit, the atmosphere and most importantly the outcomes are very different to traditional reviews. Person-centred reviews have been taking place across the country in all areas of service, from children and young people in education, older people and people living with dementia, to those using probation services, and the responses from people using services, families as well as professionals has been really, really positive. So as you can see from this photograph, it looks and feels very different to a traditional review. There's no sitting around tables reading reports. It involves everyone and encourages people to contribute in a positive way together, not in order of priority. The room is usually set up with flip charts on the walls, each of which asks a question. There are chairs set out informally and music playing in the background to welcome people into a warm and friendly atmosphere. There are refreshments of the person's choice available and an array of colourful pens for people to write with. So the first section is who's here, and this is a way that people can sign in by saying what their relationship is to the young person. This is really important as it not only helps people to know who's in the room, but it starts looking at the purpose of those attending and who supports the young person in all areas of their life. We have ground rules that are usually agreed with the young person, and they can be anything. It can be things like listen without interruption, to use plain English and no jargon, confidentiality, things that are shared on a need-to-know basis and decided on in partnership with the person. That importantly mobiles are off or on silent, that all contributions are valuable, that there's no such thing as a silly question, and we can have a 5-minute rule so that if we get stuck on a certain issue and we're not moving on, then we can put it on our issues board and take it to the relevant person or discuss it at a later time. Then we talk about what we really appreciate about the person, and people are invited to share positive information about the young person. The things that make them smile, the things that make them glad that they know them. This is a really empowering part of the review, and more than anything it begins a meeting with a clear sense of it being different to traditional reviews. It helps to remind those at the meeting to think beyond the person's diagnosis or what's wrong in their life, and to see them as an individual with gifts and capacities. It could be things like how thoughtful someone is, how helpful a child might be in the classroom, someone's sense of humour, or it could reflect someone's practical gifts or skills such as being a brilliant cook or a gardener. Then we look on progress on actions, and this helps us to see what's been achieved since the last meeting and to really celebrate those things, as well as to see if anything has not been achieved or addressed. It's important to check these things out, as actions often get forgotten or are not fully addressed if there's been a change in staff or an obstacle of some sort. We look at what's important to the person now, and looking at the things that are important to the person in their lives, make sure that we focus on things that really matter to the person, the things that make them happy. It could be the really small things like having a cup of tea and a biscuit every afternoon after school or college, or other things such as staying healthy to keep out of hospital, or being able to see family and friends. We need to gather information from the person and those who know them best about the things that must be present in the whole of their life. We also look at what's important in the future. This is about moving things forward and thinking about those things that are important to the person, not just now, but the things that must be present in their lives for the future. We can also think here about the things that need to happen in the future, things that may not be important to the person, but have to happen to support the person well or keep them healthy and safe. This could be something such as for a child in care to continue to have contact with a parent, but it could also be about them and the social worker beginning to work on their pathway plan. Then we think about how we best support the young person. And here we're thinking about what others need to do to make sure that the young person is supported in a way that makes sense to them. The things that professionals need to do to meet their statutory requirements and make sure that the person gets the support they need, as well as the way supporters help the young person. This could be by making sure that a young person always has communication aids with them when out and about, or for someone to complete a statutory assessment to access funding. Next, we look at what's working and what's not working. And we ask the questions, what's working well and what's not working well, from different perspectives. This allows the person to share which parts of their life is going well as what isn't. But it also gives the family and professionals the opportunity to put their perspectives on those things too. And this is where we can record differences of opinion. But it also helps us to see that even if there are things that are not working, there are always things that we can celebrate that are going well. We have a section in the review around questions to answer. And this heading allows people to ensure that any statutory requirements are addressed, as well as giving the person or their supporters a place to record any questions or issues they want to work out. A question in a school might be, is the statement of educational needs still relevant? Or for a person being supported, can I go on holiday this year? We have mingling time, and what that means is that when we're inviting people up to contribute under those different headings, people are really making relationships, networks, they're starting to build those connections with each other. It's a really important part of the review. So at this time the music goes on, people wonder about, they contribute their information, they chat to each other, they respond to each other, and it's a really fabulous part of the review. And everybody gets an opportunity to contribute. So this is a young man called Zach, and he's putting his contribution up on his papers using photographs, and the school has been working with him using happy faces and sad faces so that he can put up the things that are working well for him and things that aren't working so well for him. So the first part of the review either records for the first time or builds on what we understand about what's important to the young person and how they want to be supported. We then compare this to how the person is living now by asking what's working and not working from their perspectives and the perspectives of others, and think about what else we need to figure out or to learn. We look at what the person wants in the future and what we can do to move towards that. We might need to see if change can be made within current structures or resources, or whether we need to change structure or funding. The actions agreed should change what is not working, add to our learning about the person, and move closer to the life aspirations and wants in the future. Have you got any stories you'd like to share about reviews, Jill? Done any reviews recently that you'd like to share, how well they've gone?
I think it makes such a difference, doesn't it, to start off reviews with that positive. Because often when we do have meetings, it's always talking about problems to start with.
Yes.
So one of the greatest things I think about reviews is starting off with that real positive affirmation for who the young person is. And I think you're absolutely right. It's that point of action where we're setting action and people making a commitment to take things forward that really is so important.
Absolutely. And I think that the schools that I've been working in, I don't think there's one school that said that they want to go back to the traditional way of running reviews. And in fact, that where they've been started around transition, actually they've said, well, if this is good enough for transition, it's good enough for everybody. So really embedding that in the school practice is so important. I'd like to talk a little bit now around actions and outcomes. Really important part of the person-centred review is to be able to record really clear outcomes for people and actions about how we're going to help young people to achieve those. So once the information has been gathered and shared, the next stage is to explore any differences of opinion about what's based on what's working and not working for people and move towards their desired future. In this way, the person-centred review makes it more likely that the person will have what's important in their life and move towards the future they want. Actions are agreed that keep what's working happening for the person and changes what's not working for them, and the outcomes for the person are recorded. Outcomes are so important as a part of the single plan. We'd like to talk a little bit to you about what makes a really good outcome. So we're great at measuring activities and processes because what we need to do is comply with national standards for CQC, for Ofsteds, for quality assessment frameworks. We need to record activity data, numbers of people with plans, time taken to carry out assessments, and numbers of interventions. Cost information, average cost of support and hourly rates, and customers' experience, satisfaction of surveys and parents' opinions. What we're not so good at is actually measuring whether people's lives are improving. So achieving a better focus on outcomes for people using support requires that they and their families are central to the design and implementation of ways to measure results, and that comes from putting people first. One of the main difficulties we have when developing outcomes is our tendency to embed the solution into the outcome. We're very solution focused very often within services, and so we focus on the solution rather than the outcome for the young person. And the other thing is that we're not specific enough with our outcomes, and that really makes it very difficult to measure them. So what makes a good outcome? Well, a good outcome should keep something that's working. We should think about, does it change something that isn't working? And does it move us towards a future that the person wants? A person-centred outcome is a personal goal, not a service goal. It's something that you have influence or control over, and it's measurable and it's specific. And all of these make a well-formed outcome. But we also need to remember that an outcome may have obstacles in the way of achieving it. A solution is different. A solution we need to think about, is there a resource we need to achieve our outcome? It can be an item or an activity. It can have a cost associated with it, or it can be free. We have some questions that you can use to test if it is an outcome or a solution. If you've got your outcome, you can think about what it would give you, what it would do for you, and what it would make possible for you. And if you repeat these three questions, eventually we'll get to the desired outcome. So some top tips. Also, when writing your outcome, you may find it helpful to do the following. You can ask where, when, and with whom you want to do it. You can write your outcomes as though they're already being achieved, and it makes it more compelling to do it that way. And you can write it as positively, moving towards something that you want to achieve rather than away from something that you want to avoid. I'd like to share some examples of it for you. So an example might be that somebody wants a car. So the question that you would ask is, what would it give you? Well, it would give me transport. What would it do for you? Well, it will let me go shopping and visit my friends. What will it make possible for you? Well, spontaneity. I can jump in the car and go off where I want to when I want to. And it'll allow me to give other people a lift. And it might make me feel equal to other people who may also have a car. So what's the real outcome? Well, the real outcome is to go and visit my friends Liz and Anna once a week and to do my shopping on a Friday. The car is the solution. There might be other solutions. It might be that I can use the bus. It might be that I can have a bus pass. Those are solutions that will help me to do the different things that the real outcome that I want, rather than just the car. Another example, an example of this we often see on statements is 5 hours of speech and language therapy. But if we ask those 3 questions again, what would it give me? Well, it might give me time with a speech therapist. What might it do for me? Well, it might help me be more easily understood by my friends. And what would that make possible for me? Well, friendship, social activities, and to feel confident around other people. So what's the real outcome? Well, the real outcome is to be understood by my friends so that I can play with them at the after-school club every day. So again, the speech and language, the 5 hours of speech and language, is actually part of the solution. If it's only part of it, we might be able to think about other ways that we can help somebody to be understood by their friends and to be able to go to the after-school club every day. So knowing an outcome is person-centred. Using important 2 and 4 to check the outcome is person-centred. We need to think about, is the outcome truly linked to what's important to the young person? Does it take into account what good support looks like from the person's perspective, and we're including health and safety there? And does it do enough to move someone in the direction of the future that they want? Finding the right solution to meet the outcome. Once we've established the outcome, we can look at finding the right solution by asking what's stopping us. So going back to the pigs might fly slide, is there an obstacle stopping you reaching your outcome? And what could you do instead? Can you repeat these questions until you can find the solution which will work for you?
So we're now coming to the end of this webinar, and what we hope we've done is shared how person-centred approaches, one-page profiles and person-centred reviews can be used in school to inform transition and support plans. We've discussed what schools can do by themselves and with their partners to support young people into adulthood with paid employment, independent living, good health and community inclusion. And we've looked at how schools' responsibilities around information and support and how they can input into the single assessment process and the single plan.
So if you have any questions, I'm going to hand over to Kerry now, who can read out your questions or comments, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Thank you, Vicky. Thanks, Jill. I don't have any questions that have been typed into the comments box. Oh, I do actually. One's just come in. I'll read this out for you. Okay, so the questions I have, so it says, hi, thanks for the webinar. Very interesting and a great update. What has the willing engagement rate of secondary schools been like in secondary schools, and then in closed brackets, not special schools, in the pathways areas?
I couldn't say, this is Jill, hi, I couldn't say what they are in the Pathfinder areas, I'm afraid I don't have that information, but we could certainly try and find out for you. On a personal level, I have worked with mainstream secondary schools to implement this approach, and some of that has been on a depth approach with a small number of young people, and we're now starting to work with 1 or 2 schools where we're looking at that across the school and starting with particular years. If you have a look on the Personalising Education website, there's actually a blog on there from a secondary school now, and we're also about to blog from an educational psychologist in one area, and she'll be sharing the work that she's done both in primary and secondary schools in her local area.
Are there any more questions, Kerry?
That's all of the questions that I have on today's webinar.
Thank you very much.